So good morning again. Great to see you all. So anchored in the cosmos, it's been kind of a bumpy seas lately, and lots of people in the sea lately. I know there were a lot of people who have been out and about recently, and really holding the space for what we hold in our hearts and minds, and really excited to share today this idea of anchored in the cosmos. I was thinking so much about how we connect and we have our faith and we trust, and I realized there was a connection between the trust and the faith that we hold inside ourselves, and also our ability to anchor into the presence and the power of the divine, of God, and the divine order of the universe. And I'm going to hopefully link all this together as we move through our time today. So I'm kind of a water person. I grew up in Illinois, and we lived about a mile from Lake Michigan. And as a kid, my dad got us sunfish. And every summer, we'd ride our bikes to the beach, and we'd be out in the sunfish and messing around in boats in Lake Michigan. And then as I got older, I went to summer camp on Lake Hamlin in Michigan, and ultimately became a counselor, and I was a sailing instructor. I taught sailing at summer camp, and so sailing was always kind of part of my thing. And then when I got married in 1970, I got married, and my husband and I were in graduate school at the University of Rhode Island. We moved to the water's edge in Newport, Rhode Island. And we lived on Narragansett Bay in Madame Aubois' house. We lived on the top floor of this French woman's house, and we could look right down and see our sailboat right in front of our house. So I've always kind of had this water thing. And my husband, Charlie, he was kind of a jack of all trades. In fact, I was thinking about this because it's getting close to Halloween, and I was remembering that this one year he built a canoe in our living room. It was red, and you kind of had to walk around the canoe for a couple months to be able to get to the window and look out and see what was going on. Anyway, it was a really fun time to be a young woman. I was in my early 20s and playing with boats in the water. And Charlie had a friend who was a boat broker. This is going somewhere. Charlie had a friend who was a boat broker, and because we loved to sail and we did a lot of racing, sailboat racing, he and his friend invited us to be crew, which means you're going to be working the sailboat on a trip to deliver a boat to Bermuda. Sounded fantastic, it would be like a vacation. We're going to get to sail this Pearson 36 to Bermuda, and it was close to Halloween. It was like kind of the last couple weeks of October, and I remember I'd got a bag of Halloween candy, those little Snickers and stuff, just to take on board. But the guy who was the captain was a gourmet chef, and he'd created all these fancy meals that he'd prepared. We were going to have like gourmet meals. Anyway, we got out there. It was Charlie, me, this guy, and then another man who brought his fiancée along, who'd never been on a sailboat. Just seemed like a wonderful idea at the time to take her sailing to Bermuda, right? So we get out there, and about a day and a half into it, we caught the tail end of a subtropical storm. And it was really, really windy, and in the middle of the night, the jib that was on a roller furler, this is the sail in the very front of the boat, blew out and stripped with its wire all the navigation gear underneath the boat. So there we were out in the middle on our way to Bermuda. It's about 1,200 miles from Newport to Bermuda. Night two, in the middle of the night, we had no navigation gear, and the weather is getting really, really bad. Needless to say, several more days of kind of terrifying experience. The guy who brought us on board got seasick. Nobody could eat his exceptional food. We ate those little candy bars for 4 days. I mean, literally, we survived on Halloween candy because people were just like, not well. Anyway, we ended up taking on water. And I mean, it was a terrifying experience. And we had no navigation, so we couldn't contact anybody to say, come help us. Here we are out in the ocean. But thanks to my husband, Charlie, Mr. Tinker, he had created and built by himself a radio direction finder, which is call it a GPS for a boat, basically. And he brought it along, and the guy's going, oh, we don't need that. We have all this, fancy gear. But then we didn't have the fancy gear. So Charlie had this idea, even though we can't hear them, because we try to get radio signals, maybe they can hear us. So he broadcast for hours, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That means help, Mayday, May. And finally, a voice crackled back, and somebody heard us in Montauk in Long Island, and it was the Coast Guard. And they came and they sent a helicopter and they found us, and because we were taking on water. We didn't have forever to be there. And they brought us back to Montauk. It was one of those experiences, and I wish I could say that I had a very strong connection to my divine. But I was 24, 25 years old, and what I had was an anchor, which was my husband. And his belief that he could kind of, first of all, put together something like this, and then the confidence that what he put together was going to work, and it was that connection that ultimately rescued us as the Coast Guard came and dragged us back to Montauk Island, and it was really quite a harrowing experience. I've always loved water ever since then, and I've never, and also Halloween candy. I'm very, very, very happy to have little Snicker bars. I always get a lot of Halloween candy. But boats and water have always really been a big part of my life. And as I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about, just kind of that experience that we have in life. Maybe not the terror of being in a boat that's sinking in the middle of the ocean with no contact to anyone, which is pretty terrifying. But we have these experiences where we're in the waves, we're in the rocky experience of life, don't we? And just like the disciples who were in the boat with Jesus, remember that story, and basically Jesus is going, what's the problem with you guys? I can sleep in this, no problem. Peace be still, and the waves are calm. We have that experience in our own life of the sea, of what's going on around us. Some of it is going on in the outer, and some of it is just what's going on in the inner. And we need to be able to find something to anchor ourselves. When you throw out an anchor on a boat, an anchor looks like this. It's got these two points at the end. They're called flukes, is what they're called. And when you drop your anchor down, the anchor is a heavy, heavy thing. Most anchors would be attached to a chain because you want to drop it off the bow of your boat and have it go all the way down to the ocean floor. And those pointy ends literally dig in to the ground of being. They become the thing that stabilizes us. And then there's a chain that carries from that anchor, from the top of the anchor, and on a big ship, if you're on a great big huge ship, it's going to be chain all the way up to the top. On a smaller boat, that chain might be twisted into a line, a rope that you would then tie to your vessel. So the idea that I kept seeing was how we have to have not only something to anchor ourselves, to really dig ourselves in and really ground ourselves in the presence and the power of the divine, but we also need to connect the vessel that is us. We need to have a line that connects us to that vessel. So there's two ends of this ability for us to really anchor ourselves in whatever might feel like the ocean's movement. And also, when you get down to the bottom of the ocean, it can be very still. The waves are all on the top. And don't we know that about our own life? How when we go into the stillness, and that place that we just sang about, the busyness of the mind begins to slow down. So it's interesting for us to kind of go a little bit deeper and look at what are we talking about here. And I was thinking about, my work with Matthew Fox. One of the teachers that we had when I was studying with Matthew was Brian Swim. And he teaches about cosmogenesis. Have people heard of cosmogenesis before? A few people may have. Basically, it's this idea that there's this unfolding, kind of a divine order of the universe that's constantly creating itself. The cosmos is constantly regenerating itself from the very beginning to this very moment. And I like to think about this idea of the cosmos that's regenerating itself, not just as the galaxies and the stars and the waters and the ocean and the earth, but each one of us, that we literally are part of this cosmogenesis. And I think Unity talks about this as well. And beyond the fact that it's creative energy that's constantly creating more and expanding, there's a divine intelligence to it as well. And so how do we anchor ourselves into this invisible quality of creation? Call it God energy. A couple weeks ago when I was here and I was speaking about spiritual alchemy, and I talked about the soul of the world, that the alchemists call the soul of the world, which we can think of the same thing as the divine order of God, the presence and power, the divine intelligence, the creative energy, source energy, higher power, whatever you want to call it. But we all have that connection. Whether we're aware of it or not, we're part of that connection. So it's really important for us to bring more awareness to our connection to that creative divine presence that's always moving through the universe and moving through us. And for us to be willing, even when we're in the ocean waves or we're in the emotional waves that can happen, for us to know there's a deeper and a more still presence that's always unfolding, that we may not be able to visually see at the time. It may be invisible to our eyes, but it's always unfolding in a right and perfect way. And as we would say in Unity, it's God the good unfolding. There's a quality of unfolding that's for the well-being of all life, plants, animals, humans, for all life. So in addition to that energy, this ground of our being, we also have the line that we need that is basically symbolizes our ability to literally trust that divine order and to trust our connection to that divine order. So I love looking at some of the kind of inspiration that comes from some of our Unity teachers around this. And, we talk about, Fillmore talks about divine order. And I think when he's talking about divine order, he's talking about that which we are anchored into. He says, divine order is the first law of the universe. If we can hold on to something like that and begin to see the divine order that's unfolding in our life, we begin to have more faith in some of the things that are happening in the outer, that they're not the end of anything. And I know we had our women's retreat on Thursday, and it was really fun. And I'm not going to call out any names, but one of the people at our table was talking about how, I have this really favorite number, and it was such a coincidence because on my little paper they had written, guess what, it was the same number. There it was my number 3. And then we had eyeballs, we drew eyeballs to pick out certain things that we were pairing up with, and her eyeball was number 3. And then we had a prize, and she won the grand prize, and the grand prize was what? Number 3. We begin to start noticing these synchronicities, and maybe it's not numbers, Maybe it's something that you see, maybe it's a color, maybe it's a person that keeps popping up, maybe it's an image that you see, but you begin to start paying more attention to the quality of divine order that's just for you, because for each one of us, it's a little bit different. Emmett Fox, who was also a teacher in New Thought, said, there is no such thing as disorder in the universe. At that level of divine being where we're anchored in, there is no such thing as disorder. It's all in order. It's impersonal and it's eternal. It's a ground of being of all life, ever expanding. The soul of the world. Eric Butterworth, who wrote Discover the Power Within You, said, "You are not in the world. The world is in you." Holographic, right? Holographic. We were talking about that, weren't we? Yeah. He also said there's an upward pull of the universe, ever seeking to fill you to the heights of your own divine potential. And I believe that's part of what's going on from this ground of being that we anchor ourselves into. But we have to be willing to connect ourselves through these chain links and through the line that we're holding onto. The line I could see, and Emily Cady, who was a homeopath and one of the really great unity teachers, she lived in the late 1800s and created the book Lessons in Truth, actually for Charles and Myrtle Fillmore to use as kind of a textbook for basic unity teachings. And she said, faith is a spiritual hand that touches the invisible and brings it into visibility. And I kind of like that idea of hanging on to the rope or the chain that's anchoring you to the ground of being. And it's the more we are connected in that way with whatever we want to call it, our faith or our trust or our deeper understanding, our spiritual understanding, not only of the nature of who we are, but the nature of this unfolding, expanding, divinely ordered universe, then more of our potential of who we've come here to be is able to be seen by us, and we're guided by this divine energy to be fully who we're called here to be in the world. In Buddhism, the trust is always in the Dharma. We can think about that idea of the Dharma as the ground of being, the basic understanding of the truth of who we are. Emily Cady also says, you are not adrift in the universe. I had to find that one, didn't I? You're not adrift in the universe. You're held by a wisdom that knows no failure. Knows no failure. So it's important for us to really begin to see how we can hold on and continue our connection to this anchor. This is where I'd like to have the next slide, if you would, Liz. So I love the idea of using the links in the chain that connect us to divine order, connect us to the ground of our being, by these spiritual tools. And of course, we know some of these from Unity. The tool of prayer, how powerful is it for us to connect into the divine through the presence and power of the prayers that we call forth. Also, stillness. It's in that place of stillness where we can listen, we can feel and know the presence of the guidance that's there for us. And forgiveness is a big piece. We talked a bit about forgiveness a few weeks ago, but it's really important for us to do our 7 by 70 experiencing forgiveness for all people and all things that we feel have hurt us or the way we have hurt other people, because it clears the energy of those resentments. So the path on that chain from the connection to the divine up to who we are in the world is really held much more strongly. Affirmation is a great thing for us to do, to affirm the power and the presence of the connection we have with the divine. I'm anchored in the divine presence. Also, just deep meditation, this ability to open ourselves up into a still place where we're feeling that connection to higher consciousness, to Christ consciousness. We know what that feels like. And I'm just reminded, last week I used that quote of Yogananda's, when we go into those places of feeling and acting in a way that's not the truth of who we are, how Yogananda said, affirm, I am not that. I am not that. That over there is not who I am. It's another way for us to really know the truth of the Christ nature within us. And having a spiritual community is really important. I really got that on Thursday when we had our women's retreat. There were 13 of us, and we had such a deep opportunity to connect and share with each other from a heart space. And I know some of that goes on when we're eating and sharing after the service, so I always love that we have that time to share together. Finally, just our life experience. You know, for me, my journey back there in 1974, on the waves was an imprint that really taught me something about how sometimes our anchor can be a person. Do you have a person who's an anchor in your life? You know, at that time in my life, Charlie, my husband, was an anchor for me. You know, I had trust in him. And sometimes we need to borrow someone else's believing. We need to borrow their believing when we can't quite hold it for ourselves. Maybe somebody else is an anchor for you at certain times in your life. You know, I'm thinking about our friends Julia and Jane. We love Jane and her daughter Julia so much. And Julia has often been an anchor for her mother recently when Jane lost her hearing aid. Julia was the one who just was like a bulldog. We're going to keep going back there to the park till we find it. And sure enough, we know the story, how it was found by a 12-year-old boy. It was underneath a car, and the little boy who found it was deaf in one ear. I mean, divine order, how does that happen? But Julia was an anchor for her mother, Jane. And then about 10 days ago, Julia suffered a couple of mini strokes. And really now we thank you, Jesus, thank you, God. Julia's being moved to a physical therapy place in Vallejo, and she's walking and she's doing much better. But now Jane is an anchor for Julia. So we have that in our life, don't we? We have a few anchors here who support us in so many ways. But it's important for us to be aware of this connection that we have, that there's an anchor that we can hold on to, but also there's something else that we need to do our part as this chain that connects us to the divine presence. So just a couple ways that, you know, we can get lost, and I'm not going to go into the loss, but just being mindful, maybe one of these is something that happens for you, that we can let fear kind of break the chain for us. And when we do that, it puts us into a survival mode. You know, so we need to be really mindful and have practices, whether it's an affirmation or a short meditation that you do, that bring yourself back. I am not that. Fear is not the name of who I am in any way at all. We also can find that we find ourselves doubting. And, you know, I was talking to Jim this morning, you know, sometimes we're doubting that the things we want to unfold in our world, in our country, are going to happen. Even when millions of people want them to happen, we may have doubt, is it really ever going to matter that I'm doing this? But that doubt just really disconnects us, doesn't it? Doubt disconnects us from our spiritual vision. It disconnects us from knowing the truth of who we are, and it disconnects us from the anchor of the truth of the ever-present divine order and goodness and grace of God moving in and through life and all moments. Also, isolation, and I think, you know, since COVID, I think this has been such a sad part of our world. I hear more and more about young people who have committed suicide, and just this sense of being disconnected and isolated, and how important it is for us to really keep ourselves engaged in community. When we need support, to be willing to ask for support. When we have support to give, to put it out there, because when we feel that we have something to give, there's clearly somebody who needs it. We wouldn't be feeling it if it wasn't there. So to really not allow ourselves to get lost in the sense of isolation in our world. And finally, just this idea that we can get overwhelmed, just overwhelmed and distracted. And when we do that, we can let go of the chain. We can forget that we're connected. We get caught up in this sense of busyness and confusion. So hopefully this has landed for you in a way to begin to really understand that this idea of connecting to the living presence of spirit is kind of there's a process. There are two ends to the same thing. There's the anchoring in and the awareness and trust that we have with the divine order and the presence of God or Source, however you know that. And there's also our part of holding on and really keeping those links of the chain in good shape, not letting them rust or become old because we're not tending what's ours to do. So I'd like right now to do a short meditation, if we get everyone to put everything aside, and then David, I'll let you know when to turn the lights back on. I kind of watch eyeballs, and when I see people still, eyes closed, I just let the lights stay down. Thank you, Guy. So let's just take a moment now and turn within, becoming still, and begin to feel ourselves held by something deeper. Let your feet rest firmly on the floor and rest your hands in your lap. And just begin to gently follow your breath, inhaling and slowly exhaling. And with each breath, feel yourself arriving more fully to the moment. And I invite you to imagine that you are a vessel, a small, steady boat resting on a wide open ocean. There may be waves, and there may be some movement, but there's no fear here because you are anchored. Feel the weight of that anchor that you've dropped down. Notice it drifting downward, going deeper and deeper until it reaches something very solid. The bottom of the ocean floor, unmoving, eternal. This is not just the bottom of the sea. This is the ground of being. This is divine order. This is creation, the unshakable structure beneath all things, ever changing, expanding. And your anchor digs in. 2 points gripping into the foundation of the universe itself. Not to hold you back, but to hold you steady. You're now anchored into the cosmos, into Source, into creation. And you feel that connection, that line between you and your heart, and that deep, deep cosmic well of truth. And that connection that line is trust. It's not belief in an outcome. It's confidence in the living spirit, in the presence and power of divine order, in the creative energy of the universe. And one end of that line is you. It's your faith, it's your prayers, it's your stillness, your willingness to forgive and affirm the truth of your being. It's your willingness to remain open, to meditate and connect and ask for support when you need it. And the other end of that line, the other end is embedded in the soul of the world, in the wisdom that birthed galaxies, in the love that moves through all life, in the same breath that moves through you. And now imagine that above you, around you, and even within you, the cosmos is unfolding, continuing to unfold. Stars are being born. Worlds are being shaped. Light is stretching across the vastness of space. All guided by the invisible thread of divine intelligence, anchored and tethered directly to you. You're part of this. You're not separate. You're not adrift, because you are a living expression of the cosmos, the ongoing creation of the universe. The story of life becoming as you. So take a deep breath now. Silently affirm, I am anchored in divine order. I trust the Spirit, the living Spirit within me. I am held by the wisdom and divine intelligence of the cosmos. And slowly bringing your awareness back to your body and to the space around you. You might wiggle your fingers or your toes a moment just to feel your body. Find that sense of steadiness beneath you, both the physical steadiness of the ground beneath your feet and the spiritual anchor connecting you to the divine presence. When you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. And know this, you are not alone. You are never adrift. You are anchored in trust, in the living spirit of truth, and in the great, extraordinary, imaginative unfolding of the universe. And all is well. you. We have music.